Hi, my name is Tamara Myles. I am a organizational consultant focusing on productivity and meaningful work. I help leaders set up systems to make individuals and organizations flourish.
Wesley Adams, I'm the CEO of SV Consulting Group, and I help leaders and their teams reach their full potential.
I went back to school last year to get a master's in applied positive psychology because I noticed over the past 14 years of working with executives that the more productive people become and the more time they save, the more effective they become. They don't necessarily become happier. They have this extra time, they're working on the important things, but how do they ensure that they're working on the right things and that work is meaningful? And so I wanted to go back to school to study what comes after productivity. What does productivity create space for? What can enable productivity? And so going back and studying positive psychology, positive organizational scholarship, I discovered that there's this concept called meaningful work, which is about how people experience meaning at work and how meaningful work enables engagement, productivity, and some great well-being outcomes.
I chose to do this research on meaningful work because I think there's a real magic that happens when people work in an environment where they can achieve their potential and they find real deep connection to their work and their colleagues. And I was really interested in figuring out if there was a way that we could somehow measure that and create some tools to help leaders implement those practices or enable that type of work within their organizations. So I'm excited to talk a little bit more about the research and what we found.
I think we both have had experiences, in our past working lives where we experienced work that was meaningful and then experienced work that wasn't meaningful. And we were really curious about, what is it? Why was this a really meaningful experience? Why was this, even though it was so purpose-driven, why was it not so meaningful? So we wanted to find that out. And so through our studies, we discovered this method of research called exemplar research. So that means that they look at companies or people, you can do that with individuals, but somebody who demonstrates the construct you are studying in a extraordinary level. And so then you study these exemplars to learn what it is that they're doing right, that other people can then learn and apply to improve the way that they are enabling meaningful work or any other construct that you're studying. So we decided that that would be a great way to approach the study of meaningful work. We really wanted to learn from leading organizations, and we wanted to see what are the best practices. And our ultimate goal was to develop a methodology. We're both consultants, and we both want to help other leaders, other companies create more meaningful work for more employees.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think both of us coming into the program were practitioners. We both intended not just to study these things academically, but really figure out how we can take this knowledge, the scientific rigor, into the world and help leaders apply it to make organizations better, to make the lives of their employees better. And so it was really an exciting opportunity to take all of the academic literature that we were learning about and compare it to what's happening practically in the world with these leading companies who are best places to work or are known for having great cultures, and really see where the crossover was there and how those two sides of the coin could inform each other in creating this methodology that helps leaders foster meaningful work in their organizations.
For me, I went into this, unknown research. I had never conducted my own research before. And so we went in, and I was thinking, we are going to discover these new, brilliant ideas that nobody discovered before, and it's going to be amazing. And so as we were conducting these interviews, a lot of these practices were pretty common sense things and not rocket sciencey. And I was at first very disappointed about that because I thought, we needed to discover something great and new. And what I came to realize is that we are discovering something great, but it's even better. It's even more exciting that these aren't aspirational, unreachable things. These are all skills that people can actually build. They're all common sense that leaders can take and implement. These are behaviors. And so, because they are common sense, it's easier for us as practitioners to go out in the world and help leaders enact these behaviors. And so, they're common sense, but not common practice. And so, I would say that was one of our big aha moments in the research.
Any organization that wants to grow or change or develop has to take risks. And if there's not a safe space for people to bring their ideas to the table and to try new things, that holds organizations back. And so there are a lot of cultures in which making mistakes is really frowned upon, and people avoid them or even hide them at all costs. And that keeps an organization from really growing and developing. And I think along with that is the idea of growth mindset, the idea that you can improve at all of these things. These are all learnable skills. They're not things that some of us are maybe naturally more inclined towards some of these ideas than others, but all of this is learnable. So anyone can be trained or develop the skills to foster meaningful work. It just takes some effort and some dedication. So
I might also add that maybe lack of awareness might be another impediment, maybe another reason why these aren't common practice. I think if you think about culture as, the way things are done around here, or cultures like water to fish, right? You don't really notice it until it's brought to your awareness. And so if you always do things the way they've been done and you're not aware that there's a better way, then maybe it's keeping you from improving. And one of the principles I think that illustrates this really well is we found that the organizations that we interviewed, they onboard employees in a really meaningful and extraordinary way. And they see the onboarding moment when a new employee starts at the organization as a special moment in the person's life. One of our interviewees mentioned that it's a sacred moment. They treat it almost like a wedding. And so they create rituals around this onboarding, whereas most companies onboard you with, here's a bunch of HR practices and policies and manuals, here's your new computer, and good luck, somebody might take you out to lunch. And it's really, that was a stark difference in the way things are just generally done, and the awareness that there's a much better way.
So selecting for purpose and values alignment essentially means hiring people that are aligned with your company values and the things that you care about in the world. So one of the, I wouldn't say that it's easiest, but one of the most important things that you can do is get the right people in the door. Because if you have people who are highly skilled and great at their jobs, but don't care about the same things that your organization cares about, it's not something that you can fix. You can't retrain those people to share the same values that you share. You can always develop people's skills, but you can't really shift their values in a meaningful way, aside from, some huge life event generally. So, a lot of the companies that we spoke with have a particular value screening. It's part of the HR recruitment process. At Zappos, for example, a developer and you are super highly skilled and they really badly need a developer on the team. If you don't make the values interview, you don't get hired at Zappos because their values and their culture is that important to them. In fact, they even, during the month-long onboarding process, will pay you to walk away if you don't think that the job is aligned or your values are aligned. So they hold that kind of values alignment in very high esteem, and that's really served the organization over the years.
So once they hire the right people, they want to make sure that they feel very welcomed into the company. And so a lot of these companies create rituals, week-long onboarding classes. For example, Google does what they call the Noodler onboarding. So for the new Googlers, and they bring in classes at a time. And before COVID, they would bring them in person to the Google headquarters and have a week-long event, basically, where they would do the usual, but also do a lot of team building, fostering organizations, fostering relationships across the organizations with people that may never work together and may work in different countries, but they will develop, encourage them to develop those relationships, and then even schedule time on their calendars for the next year to have touch bases, so they continue to develop these strong relationships across the organization. Another company that does a great job with onboarding is, Wes was saying, Zappos. They have these classes. They onboard people. It's a month-long process. They offer 2 weeks of pay if you want to leave. But not only that, they every single person that comes in, from a senior C-level executive to a customer service representative, gets onboarded together. They use storytelling as a tool. So these leaders from the organization come in and tell stories about customer impact, stories about each of the company's values, so that each person really connects the values to the lived experience of them, to the behaviors that are important in the company. And one of the other things they do that's really great is that every single employee has to do a rotation as a customer service representative, because their mission is to deliver wow. And so how they do it is through customer service. And so even a new C-level executive comes in, has to do a week-long rotation as a customer service rep and take calls and see, how they actually live these values, which is pretty remarkable.
So encouraging collective ownership of culture is really about bringing everyone into the conversation about the values and the mission and the purpose of the company. Obviously, the tone is set at the top from the leaders, but the real culture happens in the day-to-day interactions of people. That happens during meetings on Slack, in the conversations people are having in the water cooler, or these days, one-to-one on Zoom. And it's a living, breathing thing. It's a living organism. And I think Katie Burke, who's the chief people officer at HubSpot, who we interviewed, compared culture to a family recipe that's handed down from generation to generation. The original recipe, sometimes you add a little bit to it. The next generation will take a little something out and add something of their own. And so it continues to be a family tradition, but it changes and develops as the generations change, as people change. And so understanding that it's a living, breathing thing and will continue to develop, and that it's important for everyone to participate is a really important factor. It's about leaders walking the talk, aligning the spoken values with the behavior that they're demonstrating. So this was often referred to as matching rhetoric and reality in some of the organizations that we interviewed. And it's really about, aligning those behaviors with the spoken values. So, for example, if you're a leader and people value teamwork, or you say you value teamwork, but they see you go behind somebody's back or do something that benefits you individually and not the team, that can very quickly destroy people's belief in the company, and it's very hard to recover from. So it's critical as a leader that you are demonstrating the behavior that you value. And I think especially now during COVID, when everybody is separated and there's a lot of uncertainty, it's even more important for leaders to show up, to be visible, to be over communicating and over demonstrating the behaviors that are important to the company, because people are hungry for that. They really take their cues from senior leadership. And it's important for company leaders right now to show up and demonstrate that behavior and let people see it. Connecting individuals' daily work to higher purpose is really about telling the story of the overall impact of your organization. So this can be as simple as really allowing people to understand who your customers are, who you're helping, what impact your work has on them. And we talk about these as impact stories. The idea of storytelling is a really important part of communicating these things within an organization. There's an example from Adam Grant's research. He's an organizational psychologist at Wharton who did a study of university fundraisers. And these are the people who, you probably get calls from, if you're an alumni of any higher learning institution, they call, they ask you for money, can you donate something this year? And the study separated people into two groups. One group just had a leader talk about the importance of higher education and why it was valuable. And the second group was actually introduced to a student that benefited from a scholarship from the money that was raised by that group of people. And they got to hear why it was important to that person individually and how it had impacted their life. And pretty amazingly, the second group raised over the next couple of months 400% more than the first group, because they really understood the value of, even though it's really frustrating to make those calls and get no's all the time, they were able to connect with the end purpose of their work. They made more calls, they raised more money when they did actually get a commitment. And it was because they understood the larger purpose of their work. So as a leader, no matter what your job is, if you can tie those daily tasks to a larger purpose that you're contributing to and help remind people of those things, that can be a really powerful tool in inspiring people to do more.
So, empower with value bounded autonomy. This one is all about how these organizations structure the way that employees are free to do their job. So, once they hire great people, they don't micromanage them. They don't create lots of rules about how to do the job that they were hired to do. And so there was a research linking autonomy to meaningful work. And the relationship between the two was so high that the researchers said that autonomy may be a critical factor in meaningful work. So some of the organizations that we looked at that talked specifically about autonomy, the extreme outlier example is Zappos. Again, they have a system of holacracy, a self-managing system where they have these circles that people are free to kind of jump from circle to circle, or they're in multiple circles, and it's self-organizing. There's a circle lead, and that circle lead is responsible for connecting everybody's, so that team's work to the purpose of the organization. But at any given time, you may be in 6 or 7 different circles doing different projects. Google, so that's the most extreme example, but a company like Google gives their employees 20% of their time to work on projects that are personally significant. So there is those examples, but also examples of other companies that do it on the day-to-day. Katie Burke told us that one of HubSpot's main values is autonomy, that once they hire the great people, it would be meaningless for them to have a bunch of rules about how to do their job. But one important aspect of this principle and of this finding is the value-bounded part of the autonomy. So the way we described it in the research and the way we like to think about it is by thinking of the Peter Parker principle: with great power comes great responsibility. So they give these employees autonomy, but the autonomy is bounded within the set of behaviors and expectations of the company. They don't tell you how to do your job, but they encourage you to turn to the values and behaviors associated with those values to guide your individual decisions about how to do your job. A lot of traditional organizations, or a lot of what you hear about work or people when they describe their work is, I must enter my professional self now. I'm going to be my work self. And they leave so much of their personal personality behind. And these companies want their employees to show up fully And the beautiful thing about this principle and about the way that these companies operate is that, when individuals show up fully and are vulnerable and show parts of themselves, they embrace that. So there is a huge element of psychological safety and trust. It's not just about saying, bring your whole self to work and come show up fully and then not embracing that. One example, so we conducted these interviews at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. So people had just gone virtual. Everybody was kind of trying to work from home, work with home, figure out how is this going to be? What does that mean? And a few companies right away thought about their employees' well-being, not just about how can we keep them productive, how can leaders continue to micromanage, right? But it was, we know that parents are having a really hard time right now because they're trying to homeschool and work and take care of their house, and everybody's scared. And so they hired musicians to do virtual concerts for kids to give the parents a break. Another organization knew that some of their employees with addiction would be really vulnerable because they wouldn't be able to go to their AA meetings. So they immediately hired AA meeting facilitators and offered virtual AA meetings to support their employees' well-being. So that was a beautiful way to not only encourage people to show up fully, but also embrace and support them. Fostering cross organizational relationships is all about how these companies prioritize relationships, caring, and connection to support employees' well being. A great example of a company that does that is actually 15Five. In our interviews with us, you and Courtney mentioned the practice of high fives, about how you encourage employees to recognize each other cross-organizationally. So not necessarily just people who work together or a boss recognizing an employee, but across the levels, expressing gratitude and appreciation and recognition. That's one way that organizations are fostering relationships. And another way is the example of Zappos. They do a lot of company outings and different ways to encourage connection, volunteering together. And what they did to pivot during the pandemic is they created this daily virtual trivia game for the employees to come and join and connect, have a break from work, but also continuing fostering the relationships. So different people who worked in different teams could join this trivia and compete and get to meet each other and have a little break from the crisis, I guess, of the pandemic. So these are really important ways that relationships contribute to these organizations' sense of meaningful work.
Just like it's important for leaders to model valued behavior, it's also important for organizational policy to match the values of the company. And often we can see a misalignment between those two things. So, for example, if your company values teamwork, but people are incentivized, they get a commission or a bonus based on individual sales, why would I work with my team or go out of my way to help you when I'm actually getting paid to do my own thing? So, really taking a look at things like incentives, performance evaluations, rewards and recognition within the company. I think especially peer-to-peer recognition is important. How are people within the company able to recognize others for living up to the values of the organization? HubSpot actually does a really amazing thing at the beginning of every year called the gratitude jar. So everyone on your team at the beginning of each year writes down little notes of things that they're grateful to you for. And you actually put it in a physical jar, which people keep on their desk or at home. And so when you're having a tough day, or if you need a little inspiration anytime throughout the year, you can open up the jar, pull out a little note, and you have some ready-made gratitude and good emotion for you at any time. And I thought that was just an amazing way to capture something that was of value to the organization and literally bottle it up and give it to people.
Recognizing possibility and nurturing talent potential is really about going beyond learning and development. We know from research in meaning in life that people need struggle to grow, that a lot of the sense of meaning, the people derive a lot of their sense of meaning in life through struggle. And so it's very similar at work. About meaningful work is about being seen as somebody who has a lot of potential to grow. And so this principle is really closely tied to the value bounded autonomy and the whole person engagement principle. Leaders in these companies are actively looking for opportunities to stretch their employees by giving them assignments that they might not necessarily feel ready for, but that the leaders trust and know that they can do. So our interviewee from Schneider Electric mentioned that right when she started, she was given an assignment that had come directly from the CEO to develop a program that she didn't feel like she was ready for. She hadn't done it before, and she was really nervous about it. But she said that her boss trusted in her so much and saw so much potential in her that she did it because she didn't want to let her down. And so she had full autonomy on how to do it, and she sought help. She asked people who knew, and she developed this program that now, 6 years later, is still being used. And she has such a quiet sense of pride in that job that she did. And then another person, our Google interviewee, mentioned that one of her superpowers, she called it a superpower, is to see possibility in people. She always tries to connect with people and interview them and ask them really personal questions to see where they could go and develop possibilities that these individuals don't even see for themselves yet. And so that was a beautiful way that these companies develop their employees, by seeking this potential and this growth opportunity for them that they don't even see yet. And a lot of the underlying themes of this principle that we heard in the interview, but we didn't say it in our paper because it's not a word that's used a lot in business, is love. They bring such love to developing their people. And we kept hearing it, without, and they never called it love, but it was definitely underlying the underlying theme of this principle.